I want you to picture a city that really shouldn't exist. Imagine this thin spit of sand, barely rising above the waterline of the Caribbean.
Right.
It's hot, it smells of salt and, unwashed bodies, and the ground beneath your feet just feels temporary.
And you're seeing these ships coming in.
Exactly. It's the late 17th century. The ships are riding low in the water, hulls scraped raw, running lights are out, and the crews look like they haven't slept in a week.
And crucially, nobody on the dock is asking where they came from.
No questions asked. This is the Port Royal we all think we know, right? The wickedest city on earth.
Sword fights, rum, Jack Sparrow, all of that.
All of that. But for this deep dive, we're going to look past the movie set version. We've got sources here, census records, council minutes, that tell a completely different and honestly a much more interesting story.
Because here's the paradox of Port Royal. It produced nothing.
Zero.
It didn't grow sugar, not in the city itself. It didn't manufacture anything. It was a sandbar.
And yet, for a few decades, it was arguably the richest city in the West. So the mission here is to figure out how. How does a town that produces nothing become the center of everything?
We're not looking at the sword fights. We're looking at the architecture of information that made those fights profitable.
It's like we're changing genres.
Exactly. We're moving from an adventure story to more of a financial thriller. Because if you really look at the engine of Port Royal, it wasn't just about stealing things.
Stealing is the easy part.
Any guy with a cutlass can do that. The hard part is keeping the value. Port Royal was a machine designed to intercept the movement of wealth and, this is key, to process it.
That's the real aha moment for me in these sources. You need a back-end system. You need people who can turn a pile of stolen Spanish silver into, say, a bank draft in London.
Right, and the pirates, they were just the front end. They were the muscle.
So who was running the operating system?
Well, the software running the city was managed by a very specific, and I think often overlooked, group of people, the Spanish-Portuguese Jewish merchants.
The Sephardim.
Exactly. And the sources are really specific here. We're not talking about some vague merchant class. We can pretty much pinpoint who is running the show.
Okay, so let's look at the demographics. I think there's this tendency to imagine some huge metropolis, but the 1680 census paints a much tighter picture.
It really does. We're talking about a very specific slice of the population. The census identifies around 20 Jewish households.
Which sounds small.
It sounds small, but in a town that size, it's significant. And what matters even more is the geography. They're not just scattered around town. They are clustered on Thames Street.
And looking at the old maps, Thames Street is right next to the King's Wharf.
It's the waterfront. It's the 17th century equivalent of having an office on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. They are right where the cargo hits the dock.
And that location tells you everything.
It tells you their function. And we know these families were mostly refugees, right?
Right. Many were conversos, Jews who'd been forced to convert in Spain or Portugal. Or they were refugees who had fled to places like Amsterdam before coming to Jamaica.
Which begs the question, why Jamaica? The English weren't exactly known for being, super welcoming in the 1600s.
To anyone, really.
It was a pragmatic arrangement. Jamaica, under the English, offered room to breathe. It offered the ability to live openly, which was a capital crime in Spanish territory. But unlike the English colonists showing up to be sugar barons, these families stayed in the city. They were merchants, brokers, money changers, ship owners.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I'm an English privateer, say I'm Henry Morgan, why do I need a Sephardic merchant? Why not just use an English guy? I speak English, he speaks English. Why go to the guys on Thames Street?
That is the million-dollar question. And it comes down to what some historians call the diaspora advantage.
Okay.
Being a refugee is, it's obviously traumatic. You lose everything. But that scattering forces you to build a survival mechanism that, in this specific context, becomes a really potent economic weapon.
Networks.
Networks and language. Think about it. The privateers are attacking the Spanish Empire, but most of these English sailors spoke, English.
And maybe some bad French.
Right. So you capture a Spanish galleon. Who reads the manifest? Who interrogates the captain to find out where the rest of the fleet is?
You need someone who speaks Spanish.
You need someone who speaks the cultural language of your target. The 1671 council minutes explicitly mention these merchants acting as agents and interpreters for Henry Morgan's raids. But it's deeper than just translation.
How so?
It's about trust and information. A merchant on Thames Street probably had a cousin in Curacao, an uncle in Amsterdam, and here's the real kicker, relatives still living, often undercover, on the Spanish Main.
So while the English government is basically guessing what the Spanish are doing,
These families have like a family group chat going. They knew things the governor couldn't possibly know.
which brings us to the what. We have the people, we have the network, but what are they after? The sources keep mentioning the Silver Gauntlet.
Right. To understand Port Royal's wealth, you have to get your head around the geography of the Spanish Empire. It was just incredibly inefficient.
Explain that.
Okay, so the Spanish are pulling tons of silver out of the mines in Puro Potosi, the famous one,
The mountain of money.
literally. But they can't ship it straight to Spain. South America is in the way. So they have to ship it up the Pacific coast to Panama City.
And Panama is this skinny little strip of land, but it's not exactly a highway.
It's a nightmare. It is the imperial bottleneck. To get all that silver from the Pacific to the Caribbean where the galleons were waiting, they had to haul it 50 miles through some of the most hostile jungle on Earth.
And that 50-mile trek,
Yeah,
that's the Silver Gauntlet.
that's the gauntlet. And there were two ways to do it. You had the Camino Real, the Royal Road, which was a mule trail, or you had the Camino de Cruces, which was even crazier mules for part of it, then loading the silver onto little boats to float down the Chagres River.
Just visualize that. The entire wealth of the Spanish Empire, the money for their wars, their palaces, everything, is sitting on the back of a mule, in the mud, or on a wooden barge in a crocodile-infested river.
It is so, so vulnerable. But here's the thing. It wasn't always there. The silver only moved when the big fleets arrived from Spain to pick it up. The rest of the year, it was locked down. So there was a rhythm to it.
Timing is everything.
Timing is the only thing. If you're a privateer, you can't just sail up to Portobello when the Spanish Armada is sitting there. That's suicide.
You want to hit the mules in the jungle.
Before they reach the forts. But if you show up 2 weeks early, you get nothing but mosquito bites. 2 weeks late, the silver's already on its way to Spain.
So you need to know exactly when those mules are leaving Panama City.
And that is where the Thames Street network provided the ultimate value. Through those letters, through contacts, the merchants in Port Royal could feel the pulse of the trade. It turned maybe into exactly.
It's basically corporate espionage.
It's better. It's actionable military intelligence. The privateers were the kinetic force. They were the missile. But the merchants provided the guidance system. They told the missile where to go.
Okay, so the raid works. The privateers come back to Port Royal. And this is where I think the story gets misunderstood. We imagine they just come back with chests of gold coins.
The treasure chest trope, yeah.
And
Sure, there was silver, but a huge amount of what they stole was just stuff. Commodities, cocoa, indigo, hides, expensive cloth.
And that's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you do with a ship full of stolen Spanish cocoa?
You can't just sail into London and sell crates that are literally stamped with the Spanish royal seal.
That's proof of piracy.
You'd get arrested. Or at best, you'd have to sell it on the black market for pennies on the dollar. You have to turn plunder into product.
You have to wash it.
You have to launder it. And the sources here are fascinating because they describe a process that is so administrative. It wasn't happening in some dark alley. It was on the docks in broad daylight.
Okay, so walk me through it. The ship docks at King's Wharf.
Mhm.
Then what?
The cargo's offloaded. The merchants on Thames Street take possession. Then they perform a process called breaking bulk.
Breaking bulk.
It means they literally open the Spanish crates. They take the cocoa or indigo out. They ditch the Spanish packaging. Then they repackage it all into barrels or sacks marked with English weights and measures.
They're scrubbing the serial numbers off.
They are rebranding. But the physical part is only half of it. The real magic happens in the ledger book. They'd issue new bills of lading official shipping documents. And these new documents would say that this cocoa was the property of a Jamaican merchant destined for London.
So by the time it gets to England,
It's Jamaican cocoa. The paper trail says it was grown in the colony. The buyer in London doesn't know, or more likely doesn't care, that 3 months ago it was on a Spanish mule in Panama.
everyone just sort of agreed to look the other way.
It was an open secret. The Spanish goods proclamations we have here are basically court cases about it. Everyone knew. And remember, the merchants weren't just fixing the paperwork at the end. They were in on it from the start.
This is that venture capital angle you were talking about.
Right. Think about the cost of a privateering trip. You need a ship, food for 100 men for months, salt beef, biscuit, rum, gunpowder. That's a massive amount of cash up front.
And the pirates didn't have it.
They'd spent it all on rum from the last voyage, so they needed credit.
They needed investors.
And the merchants on Thames Street would advance the supplies on account. They took the financial risk. If the ship sank, the merchant lost everything. But if it came back full, the merchant had a fractional interest in the prize.
So they aren't just buying stolen goods after the fact. They own a percentage of the theft before it even happens.
They're shareholders in the enterprise of plunder. It's a vertically integrated system. They finance the mission, provide the intel, and then they launder the proceeds on the back end.
It's unbelievably sophisticated.
Yeah.
And it made Port Royal the richest city in the English territories.
Per capita, without a doubt. It was booming. Rents were as high as London.
But then gravity checks in.
Geology checks in.
We have to talk about 1692. Because the ending to this story is so abrupt, it feels like something a movie writer would make up.
It really does. June 7th, 1692, just before noon, clear sky, and then a massive earthquake hits. Now remember what we said at the start? That spit of sand?
It wasn't solid rock.
It was loose sediment, water-saturated sand. When earthquake waves hit that kind of ground, you get a process called liquefaction.
What does that actually mean?
It means the solid ground temporarily behaves like a liquid. The shaking just turns the ground into quicksand. The entire waterfront didn't just fall over, it slid into the harbor.
And the merchants were on Thames Street.
They were the first to go. Their warehouses, their homes, their ledgers, everything on that prime waterfront real estate just vanished. 2/3 of the city submerged in minutes.
It sounds like an apocalypse.
It was. Thousands died. The smell of death hung over the bay for months. But this is where the story pivots. The buildings were gone, the physical machine was gone, but the network survived.
How does your network survive when your office falls into the ocean?
Well, you look at the Hunts Bay Jewish Cemetery. It's across the harbor on the mainland. It's on solid ground, so it survived. And the survivors looked at the wreckage of Port Royal and just realized, we can't rebuild here. The ground is poison.
So they looked across the bay.
To a place that would become Kingston.
So Kingston wasn't just the next town over. It was the backup plan.
It was the reboot. See, the true value of the Thames Street merchants wasn't the cocoa in their warehouse. It was the connections, the credit lines with Amsterdam, the trust of their cousins in Curacao. An earthquake can't destroy that. So when they moved to Kingston, they just uploaded the software to new hardware.
And Kingston becomes the new commercial hub.
Almost immediately. And this all happens at the same time as a huge shift in British policy. The earthquake was a literal clean slate. The crown was already getting tired of the pirates.
It's hard to run a respectable empire when your main employees are professional criminals.
Right. They wanted stability. They wanted sugar plantations, a proper royal navy. The destruction of Port Royal let them close the book on the wild privateering era and move toward a regulated plantation economy.
But, and this feels like the key takeaway, the capital that funded that new legitimate economy.
A huge chunk of it came from the wealth built up during the pirate years.
The money didn't disappear. It just put on a suit and tie.
Exactly. The network that was built to launder pirate silver pivoted to financing sugar and slaves. It adapted.
So looking back, we really have to change our mental map. It's not X marks the spot.
No. It was a ledger. It was a business. A high-risk, high-reward global business. And honestly, the way they managed risk and credit and information flow, it was the prototype for the modern global financial system.
That's a heavy thought. So for the listener, stuck in traffic, why does this matter? Why care about 17th century logistics?
Because it shows us that the line between criminal and commercial is often just a matter of paperwork. The tools these merchants developed, transnational credit, insurance, remote investing, are the same tools running the global economy today.
We like to put history in neat little boxes. Pirates here, bankers over there.
But in Port Royal, they were sharing an office. They were the same ecosystem. The silver gauntlet provided the opportunity, but the merchant network provided the utility.
Without the network, the silver is just heavy metal in a pirate's pocket. It has no velocity.
But with the network, it becomes capital. It becomes power.
It creates the world we live in.
It does.
Before we wrap up, what's the one final thought you want to leave people with?
I've been thinking about the nature of legitimacy. We talked about laundering, about how these merchants took stolen goods and, with a few strokes of a pen, made them legal.
Right.
It makes you wonder how much of the legitimate Atlantic economy of the 18th century, all those polite London coffee houses and trading firms, was actually built on the foundation of this laundered capital. We accept the 18th century as the great era of trade and empire. But if you dig deep enough into the foundations, how much of it is just pirate silver washed clean by a Jewish merchant in a warehouse that fell into the sea?
The paperwork says it's clean, but the origin story is something else entirely.
Precisely. History is often just a matter of who held the pen last.
That is definitely something to chew on. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.